everybody, and welcome to the May 2026 Leadership Live. My name is Jay O'Connor, and we should have another good Leadership Live session for you today. So as you all know, we like to start with our why. If you would like to move the slide forward. And our why is to multiply the blessings and opportunities that have been placed into our trust, which leads us into the session we'll be starting today. So we are in our second session of Q2 of our Q2 theme, communicating with clarity and confidence. And today we will be discussing the topic, doing the right thing, the courage to have hard conversations. And today we are honored to be hearing from Professor Brian Bowman. And from here, I'll let you take the floor and introduce yourself, sir. We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. Good morning, everybody, from a very warm Wake Forest, North Carolina. I think we're supposed to reach 95 this afternoon again. So I'm glad to be indoors and glad to be talking with you guys. So we're talking today about addressing underperformance, tension, or misalignment with the people you work with, specifically probably more your direct reports or the people who report to you. We're also going to talk about some language and confidence to help you with coaching. So as you know, you've worked with people, you know that we can be strange. We have some tendencies. The human brain is a fascinating place, and we're going to talk today about how we can address some of the challenges with underperformance, as well as some of the just problems we have communicating with each other at work. I hope that this is something you can apply right away, and we will have time for questions here in just a few moments. First, let me show you some numbers. I'll let you take a look at those for a moment. So conflict at work actually costs us a lot of money every year. All of these numbers are for American companies, $359 billion in productivity losses each year, according to GitNux. That's the estimate for how much conflict at work causes actual monetary loss there. This is interesting to me, and perhaps you won't be surprised at this, but 70% of employees, 7 out of 10, will avoid difficult conversations at work. The way we deal with them is we just take a zig and zag in the hallway and avoid that person altogether. The irony of this is that almost the same number, 67% of employees say feedback from their manager is vital to improving their workplace performance. So we sort of have this two-pronged thing happening here where we don't want to talk about difficult things. At the same time, employees say, I got to have feedback from my manager to do well at work. So there's this little dance we have to recognize there. But the fact is, if we are expecting somebody else to take the initiative to address conflict at work, the numbers tell us that's probably not going to happen. It's probably up to us to address this and go ahead and deal with things. So let's talk a little bit about our terms. Employee underperformance in the literature is defined as a sustained gap between expected and actual performance. So we're not talking about a one-off where somebody just makes an honest mistake one time or two times. We're talking about sustained problems over time. Isolated incidents typically don't qualify for what we're talking about. So let's say you have a direct report. Perhaps things were going well at the start, and now we're having some time where things are just not going well. This is when some of the things we're going to talk about can definitely come in. However, there is a common thread to a lot of problems at work. In most cases, 52%, poor communication is the cause of conflict in the workplace. I'm a communication professor, so of course I'm going to say that, right? But the literature states that communication or lack of good communication, the employee perhaps doesn't understand expectations. We'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Or perhaps expectations have not been conveyed effectively. As you can imagine, there are some other causes of conflict in the workplace. They are personality conflicts. As you know, sometimes people just don't mesh for whatever reason, their personality issues there. And then workload imbalances, or perhaps the perception of workload imbalances. An employee may feel like they're doing all the work, nobody's contributing. That's going to be a cause of this also. Some of the things we're going to talk about today specifically relate back to effective communication. So one thing we talk about a lot, and this is something that Dr. Fubara and I address in some of our graduate courses here at Campbell, is if you can prevent a problem, prevent it all day long rather than having to address it later. Prevention really is helpful here. So as we think about preventing some of these conflicts, again, keeping in mind that the employee is probably not going to address it on their own, provide regular feedback and check-ins with employees. Employees, through the literature and through polling, say that when they hear from their supervisors and their managers regularly, it helps them to do better at work. And that those regular check-ins do not have to be critical. It could be, well, Abigail, you're doing a great job for us, or hey, way to go on that project, or whatever. Just those regular check-ins. When employees have received check-ins regularly, whether positive or negative, they're much more likely to listen when you have to have that difficult conversation. So think about ways to just to touch base with them and not be the absentee supervisor. Also, this is important. Use measurable criteria when you're communicating those expectations. One of the challenges of being human and working with other humans is sometimes we're not sure where the goalposts are. And if we feel like the goalposts are being moved, that can be difficult. So use measurable criteria, add some numbers where you can demonstrate that, yes, you met this goal. No, you didn't meet that goal, that kind of thing. That's much better than ambiguous, feelings that can make them feel like, well, you just don't like me. Think about ways to use those measurable criteria, and we'll talk about a couple of ways you can do that here in just a moment. Also, and this is something that requires some introspection on the supervisor or manager's part. Think about what the root causes of the problems are. Is it a skill problem, or is it bigger than that? Is it a motivation problem? Or perhaps something that could be changed with the system. There are going to be different causes of some of these things. So if you take some time to think about what the problem might be and what problem needs to be solved, it can be helpful in preventing some of the things we're going to talk about. EntreLeadership has a neat section on their website that talks about key result areas, or KRAs. Now, this is some of the measurable outcomes that I was mentioning just a moment ago. So KRAs are some key performance outcomes that can demonstrate that, yes, the employee has succeeded at their work, and here's how that can be demonstrated. You had objectives, you have goals, things that could be measured, not ambiguous things, but things that could be measured largely, and then you can demonstrate that those things happened. The neat thing about KRAs is they help to take away some of the confusion about which employee is doing what and how all of the employees' work fits together. So a special shout out to the marketing team, particularly Jay, for this image, because this demonstrates nicely what we're looking at here, because you can see on the little post-it notes or the squares that are up on the wall there, once you have a chance to step back and look at how this affects this and that affects that, it makes more sense with how the whole system works together. So KRAs are one way you can demonstrate to the employees that, yes, here's what success looks like, here's where the goalposts are, and here's how you can demonstrate that you have reached those. Now, as we talk about just being human beings, we have some strange things that we do as people. Typically, when somebody lets us down, or it looks like they have failed at something, we tend to create stories about their motivation for that. And that's something that can get us in trouble. We will create our own stories, a narrative that makes sense to us, and we tend to assign that to the person. So, for example, if somebody fails at work, it might not be unusual for us as human beings to say, well, so-and-so must be lazy, or he must not care about what we're doing, or that guy's got nothing's going well in his life. And that can be dangerous because it's important for us to stick to the facts. What can be demonstrated? What could we say with a straight face that, well, yeah, here's how I can tell that so and so dropped the ball on that one. So rather than focusing on facts, we tend to speculate and tell ourselves stories. So it's important to catch yourself if you're doing that. And it's a totally normal thing to do. It's just not a helpful thing to do. One other thing that can be sort of an interesting paradigm to think about is the fact that most of the employees are trying to do the right thing. There's no sinister thing happening here. They're not trying to undercut the company in most cases. Now, of course, you may have that rare one-off where that might be happening, but most people aren't doing that. So we do need to be careful about speculating that they have some sinister motive, or perhaps they just have personality flaws or character flaws that are leading to this. It might just be that they're experiencing a difficult time in life, and perhaps it's finding its way into the workplace. When we work with students, in fact, a lot of times if they miss a deadline or if they're having, there's just some sort of problem cropping up, we try very hard not to think, well, that person must just be a lazy student. It may be that they're having trouble at home or their family or their roommate, and try to do your best to figure out what's the problem here. What are we looking at, and not assign some sort of motive to the person. There's also a nice framework called the SBI framework from the Center for Creative Leadership we're going to talk about in just a moment, that can help to reduce defensiveness as we start looking at these things. With that in mind, there's an important quality that I'd like to bring up here that is very important to your employees, and that is something called psychological safety. I won't ask for a show of hands, but you may have been in a job prior to this where you felt like if you spoke up or asked clarifying questions, that you would be dinged for that it would show up in your performance review later, or you would get in trouble. Employees need psychological safety, and that is the belief that they can speak up without fear of punishment. Now, clearly, there's a time and a place for this, and that's going to depend on your company and what the proper way to do that is. However, if employees feel like they can speak up, that tends to lead to better decision making and better work within teams. A lack of psychological safety tends to make team members clam up. They're just not going to ask for help. They're not going to ask for clarification from management, and we know that doesn't typically lead to good things. So if psychological safety is baked into what you're doing each day, clearly there is a direction for management and supervisors and employees. However, if the employees feel like they can speak up and say, well, I need clarification about this, or I need to better understand how this works, if they feel like they can do that without being punished for that, that is going to lead to better teamwork later on, generally speaking. So this is a screenshot from your website, and I think that psychological safety and some of the things we've talked about go so well with this. We before me, straight off of Rosewood here. Great results are achieved by working together with collaboration and cooperation. When employees feel like they are part of something bigger and that they are actually contributing to something they find fulfilling and rewarding, then they will go to bat for you. They will be great ambassadors for the company. So it's nice to see that addressing some of these difficult conversations meshes beautifully with what Rosewood does every day. I'll let you read this quote. So Kate Murphy has a great book about listening. And her quote here is, "You can't make yourself compelling, clear, or convincing if you don't consider who is in front of you." So one thing I'd like for you to think about as we talk about addressing some of these difficult conversations with underperforming employees or employees who just need clarification or assistance in some way, is to think about them as an audience. And the reason I describe that as an audience is when you think about preparing for an audience, you're going to tailor your message specifically for that person or that group of people. And so think about who that person is. What is an effective way to address that person. There may be some people where you have to speak very directly with them because that's how they work. Other people will need perhaps a softer approach or more of an indirect approach where you can come in there and bring up things in sort of an indirect way and then work your way into the meat of the conversation. But think about who is in front of you and think about how you're going to listen to that person as well. Most people do not listen well. We're going to talk more about this in just a moment, but most of us, we are distracted. We are thinking about a lot of different things. We're thinking about the next thing coming up, and we're just not listening to where we are now. And that can be a problem. So think about the person you're addressing and the most effective ways to work with that person. So as we think about preparing for this difficult conversation, we're going to talk about the time and place in just a moment. But before we get there, a little introspection can be helpful here. Examine your own discomfort. There's a good chance that that 70% of people who would rather not have that difficult conversation includes some of us, right? We don't want to do this. We want all of the employees to just come in, do their work, do the things, and not have to be, perhaps confronted or coached in this way. So we have to think about what's our own discomfort? What makes us hesitate to have this conversation? Especially if it's something that can be emotionally charged or can feel personal. Those are tough situations to work on. But again, we know that if we just let them float, then they may never be addressed, and perhaps we won't have a good outcome there. Speaking of outcomes, think, what would an ideal outcome look like in this case? If I speak with the employee and things go well, what does that success look like? Think about your own outcomes and think also about what problem really needs to be addressed here. Is this person just not a good fit for our organization? Or is this person a great fit and perhaps they just need to be brought back into the fold a little bit? And again, maybe they are having something happen that's totally away from work, but is still affecting the workplace. What problem actually needs to be addressed here? All right, so as we are getting ready for this conversation, time and place is very important. Strategic timing shows respect for them, and it also shows that the conversation is important. If you can, choose a private, neutral space where both of you can speak without being interrupted. This is clearly situational, but just know that bringing people to your office, while that might be a private space, there is a power dynamic there that can be intimidating to employees. And perhaps that is the most important place, but maybe a break room or maybe somewhere else that could be perceived as a little more neutral might be appropriate. I'll leave that to you to decide what's the best way to do that. But just know that with humans, there's definitely a power dynamic there. And when you call somebody to your office, that can be intimidating to them. That can certainly be worked around, but just know that they may feel a little bit of intimidation even when they see that invitation there. Also, be careful about raising sensitive issues in front of other people. If the other person is stressed or overwhelmed, or you know they're dealing with something emotional, perhaps a more private space would be more appropriate there. You don't want to embarrass them. There's no need to do that. So as we start the conversation, open-ended questions can be a great way to begin some of these difficult conversations rather than starting with, well, you've been messing up at work, and let me tell you how you've been messing up at work. Rather than starting with that, let's begin with something neutral. Can we check in? I'd like to understand what's been going on and how I can support you. Those open-ended questions give the employee a chance to do some of the talking rather than just sitting there with their arms crossed, listening to you and hoping the meeting will end soon. If you begin with open-ended questions, that gives them a chance to speak. And importantly, and we'll talk more about this in just a moment, this gives you a chance to listen. There's a good chance they're going to say something that will give you an opportunity to follow up and perhaps see, oh, there's this thing going on with that person that I didn't know was going on. Another open-ended question or statement might be something like, we've feel that there's been a shift in your performance. How can we best support you there? You're demonstrating that, there's something a little bit off. We can tell that it's off, but we're not coming in an accusing way. And instead, we are asking these open-ended questions. This demonstrates, first of all, a good faith interest in helping. You are coming at this from a pragmatic point of view. You want to create a dialogue, and that can take away some of that defensiveness. Now, with that said, you're going to have that employee who you have to confront, and clearly, something big happened that perhaps a more direct approach may be helpful. But for a typical employee, this can be a better way to do that. You're demonstrating good faith that I really do want to help here, and I want to hear from you, and perhaps take away or take a more disarming approach to the conversation. The conversation. Practice active listening. This is something we talk about a lot. Again, human beings are typically not very good at active listening. We are thinking about a lot of things right now. We're all busy people. We've got other things that are important to us, and sometimes we are checked out with this because we're thinking about our 1 o'clock meeting or our 2 o'clock meeting. Demonstrate your full attention to the speaker and be mindful of nonverbal cues. Nonverbal, of course, just means that it's not spoken. And I think intuitively, you guys probably already know that most communication does not involve words at all. What does it involve? It involves the way I'm sitting. It involves am I looking at you directly? Am I looking around the room? Do I look nervous? Do I look whatever? Human communication is nonverbal. And a lot of times, what we're saying does not go with what we are presenting to others. So just sort of be aware of that kind of thing. Look out for those little bits of detail from the employee you're talking to, because there may be something there and your spidey sense is telling you, there's something else going on here with this employee, and let me see if I can ask questions and get to that. As we talk about active listening, remove distractions from the environment the best you can. The reason we included this photo is because our phones are a huge distraction right now. Yes, they have allowed us to do things we could never use before. We couldn't imagine leaving the house without them because we need them for all sorts of things. However, if you're talking with somebody and they're doing this, clearly they are not paying attention to the conversation. So if it's possible, if you're able to do this, maybe put your phone in the drawer, maybe put it on airplane mode. Just let them know that this is not going to be a distraction. I am listening to you. Again, this is situational. If you have to be able to be reached, totally understand that, but just perhaps maybe set it to the side or something like that. Additionally, making eye contact and using gestures that demonstrate that you're listening are ways to help the employee feel valued and to see that, wow, this person really is paying attention to me. Also, and again, this is just a human trait that we tend to have, be aware of our own natural tendency to respond without actually hearing what the person said. Sometimes we hear just enough of what he or she says, and we're ready to counter with our point. And it's important to let them finish the sentence. I don't think any of us like being interrupted. We've all been there. We know what that's like to feel like we're being talked down to. Let the student, or I say student, let the employee or the other person finish their sentence. This is something we're not good at doing because, again, we hear just enough and we think, oh, I know what she's saying. Here's my counter argument to that. But let them finish, and that is going to generate some goodwill on their part. They're going to feel like they've been heard. But also, again, it demonstrates a good faith effort on your part to take this from a pragmatic point of view, a problem-solving point of view. To that end, try to actually listen to understand. They are going to be telling you things. It may be that early in the meeting it's all fluff and we're just trying to get this conversation started. But do your best to listen to what they're telling you. Are they dropping hints that things are difficult at home? Maybe one of their kids is having problems. It could be 10,000 different things. Do your best to listen to those things and acknowledge the feelings that they have to those responses. One other thing that can be helpful is to sort of paraphrase what you're hearing from them to confirm that you've understood what they're saying. So, so and so, what I'm hearing you say is this. Is that correct? You're going to get two outcomes from that. One could be, yes, that is what I'm saying. Thank you for hearing that. The other could be that they clarify and say, oh gosh, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. Let me follow up on that and try to help you understand better. So asking that simple question, what I'm hearing is this, is that correct, can be a great way to allow them to clarify or perhaps to confirm that, yes, you have heard what I'm saying. So we want to talk about facts. You didn't call them to have a meeting with you to tell them you don't like them or to say you don't like the way they wear their hair or something like that. This is not personal. We're going to stick with facts on this. So think about it from a customer-centric lens. When this employee underperforms, that is a misalignment with Rosewood's ultimate goals. We're all working on this for a greater cause, which we saw at the beginning of the presentation here. How can we alleviate that underperformance and help the employee to work more effectively? Again, using measurable standards. We don't want to be ambiguous with things. We don't want to keep moving the goalposts in such a way that they cannot possibly reach them. So think about those measurable standards. Also, think about how their actions lead to consequences or results at work. For example, that's why these are in quotes here. When you miss these deadlines, it creates delays for the team, and ultimately that damages client trust. That way, you're not making it personal with the employee. You're demonstrating that when this happens, here are the natural effects of that or the natural results of that, and just help them to see that no one is an island. Your actions at work affect other people. And when you do well, it helps everybody else. When you don't do well, that can create tension with other people. To that end, and again, keeping in mind that sometimes we're all walking around without addressing some of these conflicts. When there is tension between team members, that affects everyone's morale. I hope that you guys have never been in a situation where there was just bad morale at work, but that is a draining place to be. I'm grateful to say I'm not in that place at Campbell. However, I've been there before in other places, and that's just, what Sunday night feels like if you've ever been there. You start getting the Sunday scaries, as they call it, and nobody wants to live in that. Dr. Fubara, I see you smiling. I think perhaps you can, you've been through that, but that's just not a good thing for us. So again, connect actions to results. Help the person to recognize that their actions at work affect other people and can create difficulty for other people as well. But we're connecting that to facts, not to that person. So I mentioned the SBI approach a few minutes ago, the situation behavior impact. This is where this comes in. So if there is a situation that pops up with the employee, you can describe specifically, well, on this day, here is what happened. Describe the impact of that as well as the behavior. What were the observable actions? And again, you're probably seeing a theme here. I hope you are. We are not criticizing the person, we are criticizing the actions or the performance of the person. And this is not a personal thing. So we are describing the situation, we're describing the behavior, that those observable actions, and then explaining the impact of that on the other employees. How did that impact our goal as an organization, our goal as a company, not just day to day, but big picture? This approach can help reduce defensiveness and improve clarity and trust. I've mentioned several times that you are making a good faith effort to listen to this employee, to demonstrate some of the actions or things that could be criticized, but again, not the person. Ultimately, what we're looking at here is a good solution where the employee feels like, I've been heard. I see that, yes, I messed up on this, and this. but I'll have a plan for that to work out of this, and we are all working toward the same goal here. I think you know that if an employee goes on the defense, it can be very difficult to bring that person back in. So what we want to do is to avoid defensiveness the best we can. Sometimes things do get tense. You may bring up this and you recognize that the employee's face is turning red, the arms are crossed, they look like they're about to pop. You are in charge of this conversation. So it may be that perhaps you should back off just a bit, slow down, and be careful not to respond too quickly to the employee if they start to become tense. Sometimes what's necessary is to demonstrate that you are in control and you can pause, you can take a breath, and it may be appropriate to just revisit that conversation later. As you know, when humans get emotional, a lot of times we are not the most pragmatic people at that point. And so just recognize that, okay, this employee needs to, or perhaps I need to just take a breath and we can talk about this at a later time. Your composure signals that this is a safe discussion. This is not a threatening discussion. And again, once that person is, if they are emotional, if they are defensive, perhaps it's best to just let off on the gas just a bit and think about when can we continue this conversation. This is, again, is very situational. It depends on personalities. It depends on employees. So as we talk about giving the employee a chance to redeem themselves, because hopefully we're all about redemption with this. Our goal is not to make this person's life hard. Our goal is to bring them back into alignment with what Rosewood is ultimately working toward. Come up with a plan. Work with that employee on some things that can help them to on the path to redemption. So think about what the specific gaps have been and be very specific is here is the improvement we need to see. Here's where we've seen some problems. Here's what needs to improve. And it's important to avoid ambiguity and to include timelines and available resources for the employees. For example, in 3 months, please demonstrate your improvement through this. In 6 months, through this. 12 months and so on, and present that as a development opportunity, a professional development opportunity. We want this to work. So have that plan together and make sure that they clearly understand that plan. That also helps you to avoid going in there just to say, okay, you're going to endure a tongue lashing and we're going to keep on the way we've always done it. Include that plan, give them a chance to find their way back to redemption. After the conversation, follow up in writing on what that plan is with some clear takeaways and or action items. This can help to avoid misunderstanding on the part of both of the people there. You have said, here's what I take away from this conversation. That gives the employee a chance to review. Yes, that this is what I also took away from that conversation. This does a couple of things. First of all, it takes away confusion. It takes away murkiness. Additionally, it documents your expectations. When you present this in writing, you are presenting this in writing on May 20th, 2026, or whatever day it is, and you have a record of that conversation, which can be helpful. Hopefully, it can be helpful in that this time next year, you can say that, hey, you have really improved since then. Good work there. But either way, it is documented. Now, there are some common coaching mistakes. Being vague, you've heard it throughout this presentation, that can lead to misunderstandings and all sorts of problems. So be careful about being ambiguous with things. Focusing on personality instead of behavior, that's something to avoid. And yes, there may be some employees who you don't see yourselves being best friends after work, and that's okay. You're not expected to be best friends after work, but just focus on the behavior of the person and demonstrating a good faith effort on their part to do what they're being paid to do. Delaying feedback can also be a problem. If you've come up with the employee or a plan for the employee, don't send it a month from now. Send that relatively quickly, depending on the situation, because delaying that feedback allows for other variables to come in and simply isn't helpful with people. Be careful over talking. Depending on your personality, sometimes it's easy to say too much as the manager. You want to be careful with that. Don't say things that perhaps are outside of your area of expertise or things that are speculation or simply things that aren't appropriate to the conversation. Sometimes it's best to just pause and let the employee have a chance to speak. Also, be careful with accusatory language. Statements like, you always do this, or you never do this. Those are very broad, absolute statements that tend to be unhelpful because they're showing the employee that there's no path to improve this. So be careful with using accusatory language. So, some key takeaways for us as we look at this. Keep in mind that preventing is always better than treating. So, effective communication and a communication culture will prevent a lot of this. And if you can prevent problems, my goodness, that's so much easier than trying to clean them up later. Also, don't delay. Early intervention tends to lead to better outcomes. Don't let things fester and become a bigger problem later. And coaching requires clarity, being clear with what you're saying, as well as some predictable structure and some empathy. Now, empathy is a word we hear a lot in 2026, but that is simply the ability to hear what a person says. It doesn't necessarily mean I agree with what they're saying, but I can sort of put myself in their shoes and think, oh, I see where you're coming from. I can see how you would say that. Again, it doesn't mean I have to agree with them, but it can show that I can demonstrate that, yes, I hear what you're saying. I can see where you're coming from there. So, with that said, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
So I had a conversation with my son yesterday, and I'm proud to say that I was calm. I was non-accusatory. I used I statements. So I did many of these things. I forgot about the specifics and the follow-up. So I need tomorrow or tonight or tomorrow, I need to give him specific expectations and a follow-up plan and put it in writing. But I say that to mention that, you know, this works. You were focused on the employer-employee dynamic, but obviously these ideas work in other contexts. Can you add a little to in terms of what might be different if I'm talking to a peer or a boss?
Certainly. Recognize that power dynamic is real, that people are going to communicate differently with people who could have them fired. That's going to be a different conversation than talking with a colleague who is typically at your same level. One thing we would need to be careful with colleagues is that we can become too casual in our conversation. And so just recognize that, this person is your colleague now. It might not always be that way. People get promoted, people get demoted, so that dynamic can change. But specifically for managers, just recognize that for the employee to really open up with you, first of all, some people simply aren't going to do that because they're going to recognize that this person's my boss. I am not going to say one word more than necessary to get out of this conversation because I don't want to get in trouble for what I might say. Others may be a little more forthcoming, but I think it is, and I say this sort of as thinking as a professor to students. I have to always recognize that there is a power dynamic there, that I'm the one who ultimately decides what their grades are going to be. I'm the one who writes the recommendation letters. And so I have to recognize that, yes, we can be friendly with each other, but we're not friends in that traditional way because we're not at the same level within the organization. Now, I do recognize, I see Abigail on the call. She's one of our students, and I know that I will work for Abigail one day because she is an outstanding person. But with that said, it's important for us to recognize that as managers, the employees, that's always sort of the gorilla in the room. Yes, I appreciate your communicating with me, but I also recognize that you're the person who could keep me from being employed here. And so just to recognize that and do our best to work around that.
And Brian, as you mentioned, the KRA document, the key results area document, can help in that regard, because most of the issues that come around having conflict are because of skewed expectations. Either they were perceived, or they were assumed, or there just wasn't this clarity. The KRA tries to clear that up, and therefore, right, you can say, look, here's where we stand, and here's how we're being measured. Here's how I am measuring you. And therefore, if we want to go above and beyond that, we have a baseline to talk about. It's quite often that a lot of people put down things that they want to accomplish in the job, right? You'll have maybe at the beginning of the year, beginning of the quarter, you'll have a sit down with your manager, and maybe if you're lucky, you put a KRA together. But the manager and the employee in this particular situation have to be very clear on what is the expectation to garner the salary that you're being paid, and what is above and beyond performance. Because often people come into saying, well, I did all these great things over the year, and I simply go, congratulations, you earned your pay. But so we got to be clear in the KRAs on what things are above and beyond, because with that clarity, now that person can almost judge the performance before they come into that conversation and have, okay, how can I get above this? Or how can I achieve the next step? It's a much more constructive conversation because the expectation was set up front.
Scott, thank you so much for saying that. And that totally makes sense. And I'm thinking back to my public relations days, but one of my goals in public relations was to avoid surprises. And so to your point with the KRA, that way the employee already knows, well, here are the 5 or 6 things I was expected to do in the last year. I can look at my own numbers and tell that, yeah, I'm on track. I'm doing fine with this. And so, yeah, that avoids the gotcha in the conversation that they didn't see coming. So thank you so much for saying that. And again, not to repeat yet again, but when the outcomes are measured, those expectations are measured, it takes away the ambiguity and the surprise of, oh, I thought I was doing fine. I didn't realize there was a problem. Any other questions?
Took the words right out of my mouth.
Brian, I do think your SBI framework was also, it's very powerful, because when you use that 3-step process, the situation, the behavior, and the impact, it keeps things nice and tight. And with that, it helps the conversation stay on, like you mentioned before, on the behavior or the action or the outcome, and not the person. Because instantaneously as humans, we start to get defensive. But when we talk about when you do this, so you don't do it all the time, but when you do this, right, and blah, 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 here's the impact that it has on myself with a team. And you're really having that conversation so that you can come to a position of clarity, agreement, and collaboration, not in a disciplinary sort of standpoint, because you're really trying to solve a problem before it becomes a problem.
Yep, thank you for saying that, and I appreciate your saying also that, again, we are not criticizing the person as a person. We're not bringing them together to say, I don't like you, and here's what I don't like about you. That is not what we're doing with this. What we're specifically doing is saying, here are the actions. Here are the natural consequences of those actions, for good or for bad, and we should be aware of those. And perhaps it's time to change those actions and do this different thing in a clear and measurable way.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. What are some bad trends that you see in communication? I feel like, there's a whole major on communication, so it's a really big part of our lives. We communicate every day, even the nonverbal cues. But are there any trends that you can see within, I guess, the current state of the world that we can be aware of whenever we communicate with others?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. I love that question. I would suggest that being distracted is a big problem in our society right now. And that goes twofold with something that's super personal to people, and that's just loneliness. I think to some extent we are looking at screens so much that we're missing out on one-on-one human conversations, which is ironic that we're communicating through a screen now. There are certainly good applications for this, but I know sometimes in my own courses, I'll take a 5-minute break in the class and say, hey guys, take 5 minutes for a bio break. Talk to each other, leave the room if you want to. It's totally okay, that sort of thing. And it's not uncommon for everybody to stay in their seat and do this. And, certainly their prerogative to do that. But I would suggest that human interaction is important. And I think to some extent, our phones have created some distractions between potential relationships we could have with other people. And so I think it's helpful to just put it away sometimes. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
Kelly, I would add to that as well, is right. One of the biggest fallacies or assumptions in communication is that it actually occurred, right? So in most situations, we believe that we've communicated, but we really don't know until we get validation from the person we're communicating to that they actually understood what we mean, say, or anticipating. So if you can end any conversation with, can you play back to me how you think or what you think your next step is? And then you get that kind of connecting piece that allows you to move forward. Otherwise, a conversation happens, person goes off, you go off, and they come back thinking they've done the right thing, when in reality it was a miscommunication, misunderstanding, a misalignment to start with. So that confirmation at the end is usually a pretty good step.
Yep, thank you for that. And additionally, Scott, you just made me think of something called the classical communication model, which involves a sender and a message and a channel and a receiver. And that depends on the situation, but you, of course, would be the sender, whoever's doing the speaking. You know what the message is. The channel might be, we're sending this through email or we're speaking in person, lots of different types of channels. But the receiver can then provide feedback. And that's when the model works best, when the message is not only received, but they provide feedback to the sender. That is when you generally know, oh, this was effective communication. One other important dynamic of that's included in the classical model is something called noise. And noise is anything that enters into that process that disrupts the process, even just a little bit. So it might be that let's say that you're having a meeting with somebody and there's a TV on in the room or something like that. The two of you are having a conversation, the messages are going back and forth, but it's hard not to look off at that, the things that are happening off to the side. That can lead to misunderstandings. And as Scott said, sometimes the greatest fallacy is, oh, well, I communicated this message. Well, you communicated it, but it wasn't received. And so communication really does involve this message making its way successfully from the sender to the receiver through the appropriate channel, and then that feedback being delivered. So great question. Thank you.
Yeah, Brian, along those same lines, that's why in aviation, especially whenever you receive instructions from, say, air traffic control, you as a pilot are required to repeat what you heard. That way you ensure that you're on the right, right heading, the right altitude, the right airspeed. So it isn't, Roger, I got it. No, you've got to read back, Roger, head 360, climb to 3,000, maintain 100 knots. You've got to feed that back to them so that they can verify that you understood the instructions that you gave them. And that's trying to close that loop.
I did not know that, but that sounds like a really smart practice. You can see the benefits of that tangibly and very quickly.
All right, do we have any other questions from the audience? Well, if we don't, it is 10:50, 10 to the top of the hour. If you're all done, Mr. Bowman, I'd like to thank everyone here who joined us. Thank you as well, Professor Bowman, for your incredible presentation. We'll definitely have a lot to take away from this. And thank you all for joining the May Leadership Live. So next month, join us again as we'll close out the Q2 theme of communicating with clarity and confidence with a presentation on how AI can support leadership communication. Thank you all for joining once again, and thank you, Professor Bowman, once again. That was excellent.
Well done, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
everybody.
Bowman. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Jay, thank you so much. I appreciate all of your guidance and help.
Absolutely. Glad it went so well for you. And yeah, thank you again. That was really excellent. A lot of good insight in there.
Probably stuff you've heard before with your background, but hopefully helpful.
I always come away from these with new information, so it was really good. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.